Each man must do his bit.
Welcome to another edition of Public Interest. I am Gabriela Patram. Joining us again is former President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana and leader of the People's National Congress Reform, Mr. David Granger. Sir, thank you very much for being with us once again.
It's always a pleasure, Gabby.
Sir, today our discussion is going to be a little bit heated. I'm going to be putting you on the spot a lot. But I want us to talk a little bit today about social cohesion and economic growth. Under your tenure as president, you would have made some profound statements on social cohesion, such as our diversity is an asset, the nation's future depends on a deeper social cohesion and political inclusiveness, and social cohesion ensures people are treated with respect. Also, in my research, the Oxford definition of social cohesion is the act or state of keeping together or being in unity. Before we get into the first question, what would you put as a definition of social cohesion?
Thank you, Gabby. I wouldn't try to define it in that way. Certainly, I feel the key word is respect, that in any community, all of the citizens should be treated with respect under the law. And also, all citizens should be given equal opportunity to develop themselves. And you can't have cohesion without respect and opportunity. But the important thing is to bring people together, because in Guyana and in many societies around the world, people come from diverse origins. And if you want to move the country forward as a whole, there must be some form of cohesion. And people have to treat one another with respect. As long as there is disrespect, there's going to be exploitation. Once there's exploitation, the country is going to be plagued with disorder. So I would say respect and give everybody an opportunity, whether you live in the hinterland or coastland, whether you are of one ethnicity or another, one race or another, one religion or another. People must be given equal opportunity to develop themselves.
Sir, on that note, over the past 12 months, since the general and regional elections, media reports are filled or have been filled with accusations and allegations of racial hostility. What is responsible for the apparent rise in reporting of racial issues?
It is significant that you should mention the last 12 months because I would say that when we went into government in 2015, the coalition that is, the first thing I did was to set up a department of social cohesion, to appoint a minister of social cohesion, because I felt social cohesion was the single most important thing we needed to do. Okay, we need economic development, but everything will be slowed down unless there is social cohesion. We wanted to get the country moving forward. And you're right, over the last 12 months, we've seen almost a halt, if not backward movement, because as early as the 6th of March, while people were still wondering what the outcome of the election would be, we had about 6 riots all over the country, sponsored or certainly involving members of the PPP. In one case, 2 of the serving ministers now in the cabinet were in the midst of the crowds. You had disorder in the quarantine at East Bank, Kanji, and Tain. You had disorder at Bath. You had disorder at Lusignan on the West Coast and East Coast, East Bank. So it is not just a matter of rumors. It's not just a report. It's not just a matter of allegations. Starting from the 6th of March, you had incidents. And when you look at the newspapers, when you look at social media, you can see that these are real. There are issues which are unresolved. And by dismantling the Department of Social Cohesion, the present administration has done a nation a disservice Right now, nobody's looking after this important element. It's not just a social sideshow. Uh, Social cohesion is important to human existence. That every African child, every Amerindian child, every Indian child, every mixed child, must be given the opportunity to go to school and to enjoy the benefits of this country. And we need to be more cohesive as a society. Look at the dismissals of public servants. Even a blind man can see what's happening. Some people are, reluctant to make racial allegations, but it's quite clear to the person who have been dismissed that, the dismissals are not based on ideology. They're based on the absence of an appreciation of the need to have services which are socially cohesive. So it's a big misstep. It is a big mistake on the part of the present administration to deal with social cohesion, knowing what is taking place in the media, knowing what is taking place in the street, knowing what is taking place within the political environment, the political landscape. We're living in very dangerous times, and if this matter of social cohesion is not put back on the front burner, things will get worse. And I see that happening in Guyana.
Sir, on that note, why do you think that the PPP is opposed to social cohesion? I asked that question because they were against it. For example, on the 2nd of November in 2017,
I remember.
the then leader
Yes.
of the opposition displayed a placard in Parliament calling social cohesion, and I quote, a farce. Also, we had the then General Secretary Clement Rohi saying, and I quote, PPP will ensure that the so-called Ministry of Social Cohesion does not succeed. I have another one here saying that the roundtable discussion that you hosted on the 3rd of September 2015 as president, he described that roundtable discussion as another talk shop. Why are they against social cohesion?
But you have to ask them, quite frankly. You have to ask the people who made these statements. It's bizarre. Here you have a society with people of different ethnic origins, from different ethnic origins. And you would think that any government would be interested in a more cohesive society. I was victim of that November 2017 display in the National Assembly, and Mr. Jagdeo was sitting directly opposite me. Well, I was directly opposite the coalition seats, and you could see this. It was printed in the paper, so it's not a secret. Why are the PPP officials, why are senior members of the PPP against social cohesion? I can only surmise. Clearly, I think a senior PPP member said that they're going after the African votes. They feel that they've got one part of the electorate, secure, and I think that's bizarre. I mean, they obviously have no regard for the intelligence of the electorate, and to deliberately say, that they are going after specific ethnic groups shows that they don't have a national idea. And in the coalition, we have said over and over again that we're building a big BENAB, and we want people from different constituencies to come into the BENAB. And let us all, as Guyanese, sit down together and resolve our differences. That is what the Constitution calls for. That is what we understand by inclusionary democracy. The PPP refuses, absolutely refuses to have any sort of alliance or coalition. And if you want to collaborate with the PPP, you have to take a subordinate position. You're not going to sit down at the table with them. You come in, you either join the PPP or you stay out in the rain. And we are different. We say, come in, bring your constituents, bring your members into the coalition, and let us as Guyanese move forward. Why is the PPP opposed to social cohesion? From the start, You know, you quoted what one general secretary said, you know, and then the second general secretary made a similar remark. And of course, once they were given the office of government on the 2nd of August 2020, they shut down the Department of Social Cohesion. And it shows the absence of social cohesion. Shows you cannot leave that to the whims and fancies of individuals. It has to be institutionalized. There has to be a dynamo or an engine, a powerhouse driving social cohesion. It wouldn't happen by itself. And what is happening is we're in a sort of free fall. Nobody's looking after the measures that are needed to bring people together. And I think it's a great pity. Why PPP is against it? Because perhaps they feel that if people are allowed to choose more freely, if people are allowed to mix, if people are allowed to share other opinions, that, you know, they would see through the PPP's policies, and they say, well, look, they're not going to offer us any future for my children, you know, and I better not go with the PPP. So they're afraid of losing their support. So they feel that by restricting or preventing the development of this concept of social cohesion, that they could hold on to a part of the electorate, which is untrue. The electorate is very intelligent, and I think the electorate, regardless of the ethnic origins, you know, will make choices based on their best interests. And by shutting the door to social cohesion, I think the PPP is trying to restrict the choice. I don't think that's good for Guyana.
Sir, we're still on the current administration. You would have referred to the 12th of January as Chinese Arrival Day. Wednesday of this week we would have celebrated Indian Arrival Day. And the Monday, yes, the 3rd of May would have been Portuguese Arrival Day. These observances are very important to the people of Guyana, but they seem to have been dismissed by the current administration. If you would like to address that, and also how do you believe that these observances, observances could change racial attitudes?
I did it for a good reason, that I am aware that every ethnic group, you know, has interests, it has certain predilections, and no one person or government must decide to make decisions on behalf of that ethnic group. As far as the way they see their own history, the way they see each other, the way they see their homeland, their motherland, where they came from. And for a long time, well, I think I'm the first president to actually establish a practice called Chinese Arrival Day on the 12th of January. And we actually went over to Windsor Forest, which is the birthplace of our first president, Arthur Chung, because that is where the first Chinese immigrants landed when they came into this country in 1853. Similarly, we know that the Portuguese arrived long before the Indians, and they arrived here on the 3rd of May, and I declared 3rd of May Portuguese Arrival Day, and I think the Portuguese were very happy with that. They came out to the celebration. And 5th of May certainly is Indian Arrival Day, and I accept it's Indian Arrival Day. I know the previous, when the PPP was in government, they tried to give the impression that it is a rival day for all Guyanese. Well, I don't think the Chinese, Portuguese, and Africans feel it's a rival day for all Guyanese. I'm very frank about that. I have no problem with an arrival day, but I pay tribute to the Indians who came to this country on the 5th of May, 1838. And I think the Indians are entitled to having an arrival day because it gives them pride. I don't think it's divisive, I think it's cohesive. And because people learn to respect one another. When we don't know about one another, when we don't respect, we don't care about finding out, that is when the ignorance takes over, and that's when people behave in a way which dismisses or disparages other groups. But everybody must have pride in their own origins, their own histories, their own cultures, and it cannot do harm to Guyana to allow each ethnic group to have such an observance. Everyone knows that there's Indigenous Heritage Month, which all Guyanese pay tribute to the original lords of the land, and we must regard one another. People are mixed, Indian, African, Portuguese, Chinese, and it is a source of pride. You can't erase a person's culture, you can't erase a person's history by refusing to acknowledge that. I'm very disappointed that these national days, although they're not holidays, which were meant to honor the Chinese, Portuguese, and Indian and Americans, should be ignored. For example, we also declared, a day for Stephen Campbell. So in addition to Indigenous Heritage Month, there's a particular day which we honor Stephen Campbell. I don't know what the PPP administration is trying to prove by ignoring these days. It's not because Granger invented it. I didn't invent it. I didn't bring the Chinese here on the 12th of January, 1853. It's there. Recognize it and give credit to the people who have contributed to developing this country. I think it's a cohesive factor. It is not divisive. And what is divisive is knowing it's there and refusing to acknowledge it.
Thank you for that, sir. Sir, I want us to switch gears a little and speak about an event that sparked worldwide outrage, which is the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, in the USA on the 26th of May. We saw over 2,000 persons in 60 countries, such as Germany.
2,000 persons, maybe
2,000 cities.
2,000 cities. I think it's more like 26 million
people.
Million,
yes. 26 million persons in 2,000 cities. In 60 countries. Because of that event, the Black Lives Matter movement was birthed. Do you think that movement is relevant to Guyana?
Black Lives Movement is relevant to the entire world. I don't think George Floyd could ever conceive that his death would spark such a massive movement. In fact, even in my own knowledge of history, I don't think that any ethnic or racial event has had that impact. It seemed to have happened just at the right time when President Trump was there in the United States. And of course, it's not as though the world was waiting for that to happen, but let me say this. The fact that indigenous people in Colombia started pulling down the statues of the conquistadors, the Spanish conquistadors, the Aboriginal people in Australia started to protest. In Europe, particularly in Britain, Belgium, Netherlands, Spain, Portugal, France, people started to pull down the statues of these slave traders. This is way beyond anything George Floyd or any of us could have imagined. What happened is that much of the third world, Africa, Asia, and Americas, were victims of enslavement and forced labor, particularly during the imperial era. And European imperialism, which was largely perpetrated by Christians, European imperialism had to invent this notion of racial inferiority in order to enforce economic domination. So what we're seeing now is a rebellion against literally 400 years of racism. And that's what George Floyd's murder represented. I mean, why on earth should indigenous people in Colombian cities, you know, behave that way, start pulling down statues? Because they always, from 1492, they regarded 12th of October 1492, when Columbus landed in the New World, as a day of infamy. That is a day of genocide. You know, back in 1992, when the whites were celebrating 500 years of Spanish colonialism, the indigenous people were saying it's a day of shame. And when you saw what happened to George Floyd, it was a spark, but there was always the tinder. It was, people were just waiting almost for that spark to be lit. And then young people, white people, you know, all over Europe started, this is wrong. And it's a good thing that it happened. It's a good thing it happened, but it just shows the true origin of racism. It is not some political invention by a party here or a party there. It is a colonial invention, an imperial invention, a European invention, in order to keep half of the globe subjected. And because the Europeans, the English, perpetrated abuses, outrageous abuses in India, in Africa, in Hong Kong, as you know, what they call the Opium Wars. And it is now people are becoming conscious of the damage that Europe has done to the rest of the world. And that is what George Floyd's murder represented. That it started that outrage, and now the genie is out of the bottle, and people will not stop. I mean, nobody wants violence, but people know that that the type of oppression to which Africans, Asians, and indigenous people in the New World were subject, you know, must be brought to an end. And the attitudes that imperialism fostered, the attitudes that are still embedded in some parts of America and Europe, have to be erased. Otherwise, you know, the world will not move forward. And that was a great day, 26th of May, 2020. People will remember it, you know, as a day when George Floyd was murdered, and people said, no more, we must bring an end to this racism. I think it was a galvanizing event in world history. Yes. George Floyd has now become a martyr for all of the people who are victims or descendants of victims of European imperialism.
And sir, on that note, what do you think is the root cause of racism in Guyana?
Well, it is not unrelated to the murder of George Floyd. Strange enough, you know, nobody ever, you know, reading Guyanese history, you wouldn't see any mention of George Floyd. But we too in Guyana are victims of European imperialism. The British were, I mean, they must have been involved in the worst episode of people trafficking that the world has known. You bring Africans, you bring Indians, you bring Chinese, you bring Portuguese, without any thought about you know, how these people would live or work together. So we are heirs to a system of enslavement and indentureship, and the attitudes which were invented are still with us. We are not beneficiaries, we were the victims of those attitudes. But what we see now is that people think that politics or political affiliation cause racism. No, it's the other way around. Racism causes the political pressures that are current in Guyana today. But that racism was there 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago. And there was no PPP and PNC there. Racism is an invention of the Europeans because they had to find some justification for holding so many millions of people in servitude, for building boats to remove and enslave persons and bring them from one continent to the next, as if you're transplanting sugarcane or transplanting rubber trees or something like that, or breadfruit trees. They treated people like cargoes. And those attitudes, which were meant to support British colonialism, are still there. But people think now that this was something that the politicians invented. No, they're quite wrong. It is something that the Europeans invented. You see, the Christian Europeans and Americans could say, look, these are not real people. These are just beasts of burden. And the moment they accepted that these were people, that these were Christians, they had to find some way of justifying it. But up to a few years ago, I mean, even in our records, Portuguese are not regarded as European. You had European and Portuguese, but the Portuguese are Europeans. But they had to find a way of defining the Portuguese as non-white in order to keep the Portuguese as indentured labour. That is the origin of it. And in present-day Guyana, we still have remnants of that thinking, which was invented by the British to justify the colonial and imperial exploitation of all colored peoples. The Chinese suffered, Indians suffered, Africans suffered, indigenous people suffered. But we have to look to the Europeans to do some form of reparation, compensation, and rectification of the damage they did to the rest of the world.
Sir, in wrapping up, most Guyanese adhere to three major religions: Christianity, Hinduism, Islam. We also have an ethnic relations commission, and we also have a rich culture. Our music, our food, which is my favorite, the foods, the traditions, the customs, and so on. What can the ERC, the Ethnic Relations Commission, civil society, and also, as we close down, your encouragement to Guyanese as we go about our everyday lives, how can we go forward in eliminating racism?
The ERC, Ethnic Relations Commission, been in the news recently. It's just a commission. It is not a police force. It cannot, of course it has means of going to the courts and enforcing certain measures, but on its own it cannot resolve a problem which has been existing for 300 years in Guyana. And it's unfair to task the Ethnic Relations Commission with removing racism, just as you can't task the Human Rights Commission with overnight, enforcing human rights. It is monitoring, it is advisory, but there are just 10 people. When you look at the composition of the ERC, you see religious people, you see Africans, you see Indians, you see Amerindians, and I would say that it is doing as much as it could in the circumstances, but it is from the people themselves. It is at home. It is in the church, it's in the masjid, it's in the mandir, it's in the schools. That is where we must move to eliminate racism by fostering social cohesion. ERC cannot do that on its own. No matter how much money you give it, no matter how big it is not a police force. What we need to do is look carefully at what causes racism. And in my view, as a student of history, I would say that many Guyanese at home or at school are not taught Guyanese history. So they grow up without knowing what other people have contributed, and they feel other people have contributed nothing. That is responsible for the PPP's attitude to Chinese arrival day or Portuguese arrival day. That is like non-people. So we need to go back to our education system our, and look at the cultural underpinnings of racism. And what I would recommend to the government, what I would recommend to all Guyanese, is pay attention to your history, learn to respect each other, and let us build a more cohesive society. It's not a job for the ERC alone, it's a job for every single Guyanese. And right now, with the destruction of the Department of Social Cohesion, right now the PPP's attitude to social cohesion is not going to happen. Not in my lifetime or yours lifetime. We have to get social cohesion back on the table, back on the front burner in this country.
Well, sir, thank you very much for being here with us and discussing this topic. Of course, there is a lot more that we can go into, so we'll probably have to do a part two another day. But it's always a pleasure sitting and talking with you, sir, so thank you very much. And to you, our viewers, we say thank you very much for joining us. And please remember, on behalf of all of us here at Public Interest, to please follow all COVID-19 guidelines. Goodbye.